Welcome everybody. Happy New Year for those of you where we didn't meet yet. It's my great pleasure to welcome you for the first presentation of our Data Coordination Center seminar series. So why did we start this exercise? The Swiss Personalized Health Network has started officially politically about 2 years ago. We had a call for proposals, and the first round of projects are now about 1 year into operation. So now is the right moment to look forward, saying what has come out of these projects that we actually can reuse in other contexts, looking backward, what was difficult, what was hard, what problems we have solved. So we now started this series that from now on this Monday time slot, mark it in your agenda, we will invite representatives of the various projects to come in here and present about what they have achieved so far. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today. We have with us today Professor Christian Lovis. Christian, by training, is a medical doctor, and he's specialized in emergency medicine, which is a discipline where you have to be very sharp, very quick in decision making and make the right decisions because you don't have the luxury of time. But he's also a specialist in clinical informatics. So he has the two specializations, and he's one of the few experts we have in Europe that knows both sides very well. The real world in the hospital, but also the science world of doing research on the data that is generated in the hospital. Christian is also chairing several European committees and the European Society for Clinical Informatics. So he is our expert on clinical data, bringing it from practice into research and back. But today we're not really hearing about the data itself. Today we are hearing about the governance, the why can we use the data, how can we use the data, who authorizes the data. So today we'll be hearing about a project that we funded in SPHN around consent and what is wrong with consent and how we can actually do it better in the future, moving away from a hospital-centric consent to a citizen-centered consent. Now, before I give the word to Christian, a few words of what we asked our speakers. So as Sylvia mentioned, these seminars will be recorded, and we asked all the speakers to address the questions on the right side, like what's my goal of the project? What are the infrastructure problems and gaps I'm working on? What's the relevance to SPHN as a network? What are the milestones of the project and the achievements? And is there anything coming out that is useful besides of the project itself? And what are the remaining problems and gaps? And the reason we come with this very specific list is SPHN is not a funding organization. SPHN is a network that aims to change the way how we do biomedical research in this country. So all the various projects in the end should fit together and contribute to moving the processes and the infrastructure of Switzerland as a whole forward. So not just your research project, but how is it useful for everybody? So this today is the first talk in our series where we look at all the other projects, trying to find out what's reusable and what actually brings us forward towards reaching the goals of SPHN. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Christian on stage, and we are very much looking forward to learning how we can move the consent to citizen-centric, dynamic, national consent management.
So, dear Thorsten, dear friends, dear colleagues, many thanks for this invitation and the honor to open this series. So it's the first time, it's probably an experience for me, and I hope a good one for you. It's also the good time to say everybody a good year and a lot of success in the SPHN project. And I think it's a good sign to start this with a discussion about consent and citizen. So maybe to start, this project is funded by SPHN and another foundation, the Fondation Lennartz. It is mostly driven by the University and hospitals of Geneva and the EPFL from a technical point of view. There is several other partners, mostly SHUV and the Swiss Biobanking Platform. So let's start with the goals of the project. many people, many organizations, many hospitals are devoted to work with consent today. And as we all know, there has been a lot of experience with the global consent, the general consent, the broad consent, whatever it's named, for research, or specific consents for research. In fact, what this project proposes first is to change the paradigm of the vision of the consent. It means that as we don't really know what a patient is, when we start to be a patient, when we stop to be a patient, what can we do when we consent something as a patient and we are no more a patient? Can we still act on this, or what? What is the exact definition, legal also definition of a patient? All this is a little bit unclear. And also because if you look at today's determinants of health, and personalized and precision medicine is really going into determinants of health, they extend by far outside the patient world to go to citizen, to risk factors, to behavior, environment, to a lot of data source information that are by essence not in the strict and close and often small relationship with a care provider, a care organization, or a disease. So looking at consent in this project, we consider all type of consent. It can be a consent for care, such as diagnostic consent. In many situations, especially for invasive diagnostic procedure, there is a need for the patient to give a consent. For the therapeutic consent also, as you know, for a surgery, for an invasive procedure, and for many other type of procedure, there is a consent. Of course, it goes to research. Is it broad consent? Is it specific consent? But it extends to many other stuff, such as organ donation, which is a willingness to give organs, access control. If you accept that care provider, somebody accesses your data, you basically consent that there is an access to data. So there is a lot of other situation where we can speak about consent that goes far beyond the very limited domain of research consent for patients. And most probably this will be really needed within all the expectation of precision medicine to be able to go far beyond this limited scope. So looking back at the objective of the project, besides the extended vision, it has to be dynamic and shared. Dynamic, it means that the consent can be changed, it can be used. It has to be trusted. I will come back to all these points in more details. So if I summary these elements, we want to have a consent that is global, it's citizen centered, it's transparent. The citizen, the people, they can see what has been consented, the people involved, concerned by their consent. It's dynamic, it can be changed anytime. It's shared, it can be used when it's required to be used. It can be revoked at any time. Somebody who consented to something, he should be able, this person should be able to stop consenting. It should be auditable, which means that it should be possible to know what happens and to trace what happens. And finally, it should not be retractable. It cannot be retractable. It means that you can change your mind from now, but you cannot change your mind in the past. You cannot say, no. Yesterday I did that. If you did it, you did it. It's a good characteristic of time. So So let's start with the citizen-centered idea. The citizen must be at the real center of consent management. It's not something about researchers, hospitals, organization. It's not something about anything else than citizen. Citizen must be able to be partner of research. They must be partner of their care. There must be partner of the way their data are used. Their data builds profit. There must be able to see at any time where they did consent for what, how it is used, and they must be able at any time to change that. And this must be the case, whatever their state as a patient or not a patient, before being a patient, after having being a patient, or anything like that. And it's important to help people to have this global vision of what happens with their data. It has to be dynamic and proactive. Dynamic and proactive, it means that it must be easy to build consents. It must be easy to change consents. It must be easy to share, to publish consent. It must be easy and fast to market consents. And for a citizen, it must be easy and usable to actually see what are the consent existing, what are the project existing, what are the consent I have consented for, and to revoke them if I want to revoke them at any time and from anywhere. And for researchers, at any time, it must be easy to see how many patients have been enrolled, how many have dropped off or dropped in a study. And of course, this cannot be retractable. It means that once something has been done in the past, it cannot be changed in the future. Interoperability and shareability is an important point. Today, even if we are moving everywhere with digitalized consents, even if in our hospitals there is already processes to get the digital consents, they are not interoperable, they are not shareable. It means that mostly there are silos of consents. It can be scanned, it can be computerized, it can be stored in the clinical information system or the administrative information system of a hospital, of a cohort, of a study. It can be in the safe of a researcher, but basically they are unavailable for the community. They are unavailable also for the citizens who are concerned by these consents. So in order to make them shareable and interoperable across all the borders, is it organizations, is it domains, is it the type of consent? How can we mix, merge, share somebody who consented for the same thing, but in two different studies using two different consents, two different specific consents, across projects, but also across time. If you think about the broad consent, we had a version a year ago, we have now a new version, and believe me, most probably we will have a new version next year. So there is an evolution of the consents. So it means that it's a multidimensional vision. If you want to look at consents from a model perspective, from a generic view perspective, it's a multi-modal vision of the consent that has to be built and made interoperable and shareable. Somebody who consents for to improve the research on breast cancer, this person is not consenting for Dr. Machin. He is consenting to improve the outcome of breast cancer. Is it for Geneva? Is it for Zurich? Is it for Basel? Is it for any? the purpose, the intention must be respected, not the belonging of the safe that holds the consent. Of course, this means that we have to build important aspects. I will speak about trust, but one of these important aspects and a very important component of trust is transparency. Transparency is a complicated process. When a few years ago, the Austria started to have an electronic, shared electronic patient record, some organization who actually fighted the shared electronic patient record, they did a large communication procedure in the population in Austria, where they put a naked man and a naked woman to say the transparent patient, to try to push the Austrian citizen to refuse this shared patient record. So transparency is a complicated way between protecting privacy and building transparency. Building transparency must find a good way in between. So a way of doing this is at least to make sure that all processes around consent, not necessarily around the content of a consent, the usage of the data of a consent, because they could include very sensitive data, but the consent themselves, these are made transparent or transparent for those who are concerned with this. So I already talked about privacy, transparency and privacy. They are, as I said, often in a orthogonal approach. The more you go to one, the less you are on the other. But an important thing here is really to understand well what it means, retraction and revocation. This is why I did this small drawing. The retraction process involves changing the past, and it's a very complicated process, and it's not supposed to happen. And the system has to make sure that this cannot happen. And then there are two processes that can happen from now and in the future. One process is using data that were considered as consented but not yet used. And the other is making sure that the revocation process is made clear. The second point, which I just evoked before, is a little bit complicated. I will not go into that. But the revocation has to make very transparent, very simple to do. It means that it's necessary that at any time, it must be possible to change his own mind about using the data, and in the future, at least for all the situations where they have not yet been acquired. So all this should help, in addition to some way to build it, and to build it together, to put it together in such a way that we build trust, but we build not just trust for some stakeholders, but we build trust for all stakeholders. And if you think about the stakeholders in such a system, you have the citizen, the patients, not always the same vision of the world. There have been nice studies showing that if you are a chronic patient, you are more willing to share data than if you are a healthy young citizen. You have different stakeholders because the organization, they can be in competition. The different usage of the data can be in competition. So in fact, the reality is that every community is building a kind of oppositional vision of the consent, and sometimes inside the same community. And if you look at the researcher in the clinical research, I can tell you that I know a lot of situations where the researchers, not just clinicians, researchers in high schools and many types of researchers in life sciences, they sit on their consent like on gold, because basically we more or less think, all of us now, that the data, they don't belong somebody, but the consent, they are the key to the data, and they actually can belong to somebody. So we have to break this while not breaking the trust into the system. So voilà. These are the vision. This is the vision of the consent. Now, when I basically wrote the proposal and convinced people to do this proposal, it was easy with these concepts to find support and to find people helping to do this proposal, and it has been funded, so it was without a lot of problems. So you can get money with nice concepts, and at some point you get the money, and you think, oh, so how will we implement this? Because the concepts are nice, and most probably most of these concepts are not so original. Maybe the vision of the citizen consent rather than research is more original, but basically none of these things are really completely new. The problem is that it's not so easy to move from the nice idea to actually the realization of this idea. And the idea came to try to see how this could be implemented using a blockchain approach. So what is a blockchain? So the blockchain is an interesting instrument that allows to have, at least for the traditional blockchain, as you know, it moves fast in this field, and now there are many types of blockchain, hash graphs and acyclic blockchain and such type of things. But I would say the usual blockchain, they are made of two objects. First of all, it's a transactional database. So it's something that is useful to record transactions, like selling, buying. This is why it went so well with cryptocurrency. But many of the applications around blockchain, they are about storing transactions. So it's a database of transactions. Another property of blockchain is that it's a database of transaction where the validation of the transaction can be made in such a way that you can increase dramatically the trust you can have in this transaction, that it has not been a false transaction, that it's not a hacked transaction, so to say. So it's a system that allows to do transactions that are based on a distributed validation process. It means that somebody does a transaction, and this transaction has to be or must be validated in such a way that it's really, really hard to false the system. So it's a database of trusted or secured or very secured transaction. And the third characteristic is that all these transactions, they will be put together in a chain of transaction, and this is the blockchain, the chain of the blocks, and each transaction is a block in this chain, so that you only can add transaction. You can never change something that has occurred in the past, and there is no. Yes, it's because of I don't know what, but. If you want, every time you add a new transaction, you need the previous transaction to validate the new transaction, so that each transaction depends on the previous transaction, and you cannot change any transaction in the list of all the existing previous transactions. And this is the chain of the transaction, and this chain of transaction is existing in every node of the network. So it's a replicated database of the transaction. So this is what I show here. You have on this slide, you can have, for example, here it's something we could do in Switzerland, is to have 7 nodes for validating and storing the consents, like the 5 university hospitals and the Swiss Academy of Medicine or the Swiss Academy and Swiss Ethics. But we could have 3 nodes or 300 nodes or 3,000 nodes. It doesn't change anything. And in every node, you have a copy of all the system, and you need at least 2 nodes or 3 nodes, the number you can decide, to validate the transaction. So when it comes to validation, you have these possibilities to build a validation process. The validation process can be permissionless or permissioned. Basically, between these two, it's whether you allow any body to become a validator, and this is the case with the Bitcoin. Everybody in the world can become a validator. Or if it is a closed system, a permissioned system, you don't allow anybody to become a validator. You only allow a certain list of nodes to be validators. And these are the authorized nodes. And then the way you speak between the nodes, the language you use, the way you encrypt the information, the protocols you use to discuss between the different nodes, it can be an open protocol or it can be a private protocol. It can be public or private. So if you want, you can have a public protocol with a permissionless system. Everybody can be a validator, and the protocol to do it is public. And this is the situation for the Bitcoin. Or you can be at the opposite, in a situation where it's a permissioned system. Only some nodes or a very specific list of nodes can be the validators, and the protocol is not public. It's a secret protocol. So these are the two extremes, with the identification power and the trust in the validation nodes. Of course, if you exactly know which nodes is the validator, you can trust the nodes. If anybody can be the validator, you cannot trust the node. Maybe it's the strongest wins, which is the case for the Bitcoin today, where the node with the fastest in validating a new transaction will be the winner, and it is the winner is the strongest. The system who has the most computing power can take the lead over the system. And if you add all the power of all the nodes, if somebody would be able, which is probably no more possible for Bitcoin, but to have 51% of the total computing power of the nodes, it would just be able to completely hack all the system. So but you can choose where you want to move in this field. So what we are building in this project and what we have actually built in this project, so I took a picture of all the points I didn't answer, but I should have answered. So the goal, you got it. The infrastructure, it's now. So basically what we have built, and we made a first implementation in spring last year to test the concept. And now we are about a month late in finishing the first MVP development of the nodes that will be rollable out, that we can roll out in a serious manner in Switzerland, is that we have built these nodes. These nodes, they have to be considered as a backbone that will handle a specific type of implementation of the blockchain, which allows to have smart contracts and to deploy it in as many nodes as will be decided, such as what I propose here. So the advantage, additional advantage of the smart contracts is that, in addition to the properties of the blockchain I explained before, the smart contracts, they are able to build automatic produce notification in several stages of the use of the chains of the blocks, so that, for example, if a specific action is taken with a specific block, there will be a notification, or some notification can be sent to some of the elements concerned by this specific block, such as if a specific consent is changed, all the people concerned will be notified. If a new consent is built, all the people concerned can be notified. If a consent is revoked by a citizen, all the projects that use this consent will be notified. If a new consent is signed by a citizen for a project, all the projects involved with this consent can be notified, and so on. The usage of the certificate can also lead to a lot of applications. Some of them, they are actually developed in other projects, such as using the certificate to encrypt the data, using the certificate to watermark the data, using the certificate to do various levels of encryption, decryption, like you have in movies or audio. Today, as you know, you can have low definition movies. It will cost you something when you do streaming. High definition movies, it will cost you another amount of money if you do streaming. And so that this technology allows to have differential encryption, decryption of the data, so that there are different levels of access to the data according to the usage of the certificate. What is also currently in the final definition, it's the APIs on that backbone. And the idea is that in this project, we don't develop apps or I don't know what. It's really an infrastructure. It's an infrastructure project, and it provides an infrastructure. There is nothing to see, basically. So, but because we get money from SPHN, and we have at some point, we need to demonstrate that, it works. And if you go to SPHN and you say, well, we built an API, there is nothing to see, move. So I will show you some demo we built. That it looks like I am moving a little bit too much and the sound is going away, so I'm sorry. For those who know me, they must be happy I don't have chocolate in the mouth in addition. So but basically on this API, it will be possible for third part to build apps for smartphone, for tablets, for web browsers, but also to build direct connection for servers so that, according to the rights and blah, 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 the different servers in hospitals can share their existing consent with this backbone, and they can also read the consents from the backbone, or some institution like the ETA domain that are using consents because they use data, they can actually access to the consent according to the right and blah, blah, blah. But so that there is really a kind of a backbone of RESTful services that can be used to build various type of application, automatic, manual, to have citizens interacting with their consent, hospitals, patients, users, researchers, administrators, and many other type of application could be imagined on that. So I will just show you a few slides about what we developed to test more or less the system. It's not intended to be anything different, but there is possibilities to for a researcher to see the projects. So it's the projects. There are all the consents that are being built but not being finished, or the consents that could be published. Then the recruitments is it's basically all the consents that are published and are actually active, and for which there are actually citizens enrolling, or there is an active enrolling process. And if you go on the Mes Projets, I apologize, it's in French still, you will be able to manage the consent you are responsible for. If you go on Mes Recrutements, you will be able to see all your running studies or all your running projects, and to see the number of cases that have up to now enrolled to this. And the Explorer can help you to see all the historization and the tracing and all these things about your activities and what has been done with these consents. So this is an example where you can build consents, and you can build these composition of a consent. So in this project, the consent, they are built with clauses, and you need to build the clauses and to assemble the clauses into consents. So these are examples here, and this is an example of one clause, and you can see that in one clause you can authorize some stuff, you can build it, you can accept, well, you can give the possibility for a citizen to accept, to refuse. You can have various type of text, various type of questions. You can type the clause if it is a question to the citizen for data access, or if it is an element for the citizen for information. So that, for example, he says, the citizen can say, I have understand the information about this clause. And you can link all these things together. So at another possibilities is to see the recruitments, and you can see well, it's not very original, but you can see the name of the project. It could be whatever study, when the project started, when the project is supposed to end, how many people did accept, and how many people did revoke their acceptation. So I will end up with the usage for the project, I think that there is a lot of work on SPHN today to make sure that the data are shareable. It's all the work on semantic and interoperability and building database and building pipelines of data and building architecture to share the data. And these all will lead to have a lot of shareable data. We need to have a good consent system, a trusted consent system, a really strong shared consent system in order to both together, when the data are interoperable, when the system has a good consent system and you have the both together, then you can go to shared, actually really shared data. And then both are important on a similar value. It's hard to merge the two. We have to keep it in a separate process. But if we give a good attention to these 2 points, we will really do an important transformation of the system. I will end up about the milestone and achievement. I already said a little bit about it, but normally we should have the rollout of the first MVP of the system within the next weeks. It was supposed to be in January, as I would not say usually, but we have a little, we are a little bit late. I think it's about a month late, so I expect beginning mid of February, the nodes will be ready to be installed in the hospitals. And by now, the discussion I had with the 5 university hospitals IT are very positive. None of them, well, all of them accepted to play the game of implementing this.